Welcome. Today's another video in the My Grief Journey series, and today it's going to be sharing some of my experiences early on, and at the end of the video we're going to be going over some practical things just to be able to help people, whether you yourself are on the grief journey right now or you know somebody that is and you really want to help them. So we're going to be exploring some of those things at the end of the video. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is just basically the days just after Abby passed. And so for me, the next day, my brother and my dad came over to help me with funeral arrangements right away. It was just a point where I was just so numb and so in shock that I couldn't really think of a lot of things just that you kind of need to do. And sadly, in the process of planning a funeral, there's a lot of things you have to make decisions on very fast. You kind of end up sometimes even shutting your emotions off, and you just kind of get in a task, basically orienting to do tasks and kind of going from one thing to the next, and it really can shove off some of the grieving process as you're kind of doing that until you get up to the funeral and things like that. So that's one thing to keep in mind whenever you're helping somebody, is if they're in the midst of that, stuff like that, keeping that in mind. I had some really good friends early on that helped just take care of Thomas and Scarlett, just giving them some stability, had them over at their house, just to kind of help us with the planning process at that point, and just, again, keeping some stability for them as well in a more of a comfortable atmosphere. They were still dealing with the same experiences that I was, just the feeling of, this is so unreal that this has all even happened. They sadly were not able to make it in time to the hospital before she passed. They came in about 45 minutes later and, had to go through the whole process of garbing up in the ICU and in order to do even their final goodbye and things like that. And it was very clinical. The whole process during COVID was very hard because people couldn't have their normal processes that you would have when your loved one's in the hospital and they're towards the end of their life. And with this one, there was just so many restrictions that people could even go in. There were so many restrictions in hospitals and things like that. So it made such an issue. So it became a hindrance to people actually going through a normal process with that. And so for me, as I was preparing for the funeral and getting to the funeral visitation, I had to walk my kids through all that, and they'd never been to a funeral before. That just really wasn't anything that was part of their process growing up because they were so young. And one thing I experienced was just them having to just come to grips with the different parts of a funeral. When they first came in, they just saw Abby's picture in the urn and had no idea what cremation was. And so I realized in that moment, I'm like, how am I going to explain that to kids? Because it's a hard one. So in the moment, I had to think fast, and I just started explaining to them. I said, remember in Star Wars Episode 6 where at the end they had a Jedi burial, and started going through the process. And at first they kind of didn't clue in, but then Thomas kind of got what I was saying. Scarlett was still puzzled, but it really hit Thomas in that moment. And then later on, he ended up coming to me and asking, why did you do that? Why did you make that decision? And so for me, I had to explain that, I was with Mommy at Grandma Emmons' funeral, and Abby had always kind of said that, she doesn't really like the casket because it's never how the person was. So she wanted that process done. And Thomas was okay with that. And we were able to kind of take that step forward. We were thankfully able to do everything at Evergreen Heights in Simcoe, the church I was a part of at the time. And they were a huge blessing, just making sure that all the streaming and everything worked out, because at that point there was only, up to the day of the funeral, there was only allowed 200 people in the building. And so the rest had to do online. And so, Phil and Richie got everything taken care of. They were such a blessing, and about 800 people online were watching, and it was just amazing that Abby had that effect on so many people's lives, that they were able to partake in that during that day. And then for after post funeral, it was really when it hit all of us. after we had family over to do kind of a post funeral gathering. It wasn't because you weren't able to do luncheons and stuff at that point. After everything was said and done, it really hit Thomas and Scarlett. They just had this whole breakdown after, and so we got together and we just talked. And I talked about the assurance that we have because of our relationship with Jesus, that we're going to see Mommy again in heaven. Because we have that relationship with Jesus, we're going to heaven, and it's just this place that we're always going to be together after. And I went through with the kids. I was always like, we can always talk about this. I wanted to make sure that communication was open, because I know in some families that doesn't always happen, and I knew that needed to happen. And later on that night, as I'm sorting through all these different things that I experienced that day, it was just really hitting me that I'm like, Abby wasn't coming back, and I had to figure out how to be a dad with 4 kids. I went through a real roller coaster in many, many ways early on, doing estate paperwork and registering the twins and stuff, which caused an issue where I found out in Canada, the fathers are not allowed to do the birth registrations online without the presence of the mother, or the mother can do it on her own. There's kind of not really an equality with that. So I ended up getting flagged by the Canadian government. They cut off all child, like CCB and everything like that, made me pay it back, sent me letters right away to order me to pay it back, even though, I'm the other parent. And I ended up going through this whole ordeal where I had to call different departments. And again, midst of COVID, they were all working from home. It was this whole nightmare of trying to get through to people. I'd be 6 to 8 hours a day on the phone, and it was just a nightmare dealing with that, sharing my story over and over, getting the wrong department or somebody that couldn't help me. And I was flagged, and it created this absolute nightmare because, I'm not working. I wasn't able to work. I'm dealing with grief. I'm dealing with all these things, and I had to go to an MP to get help. It was a whole ordeal. And it took about 6 months before things started rolling. And so it was very difficult. So as that whole process happened, my bank account started going empty. And it was just one of those things where I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I was just in shock of, like, what am I going to do? I'm a parent, 4 kids. I'm looking like I'm going to be homeless soon. I'm going to have to sell my house. I talked with my parents about if I got to move in with them, and kind of my situation. And they just said, we'll try to support you as best we can right now. And if that ultimately has to happen, absolutely, you can move out to the farm. And so I just went to God, and I just said, God, I can't do this. I just need your help. And I just poured out myself to God. And within the coming days, it was just like I would get cards and sympathy cards, and there's things with cash and checks. And then I'd get things where I'd have a bill, and then suddenly somebody would feel led to give me something, and they'd leave a note or something, and it was the same amount as the bill. And it got really crazy because I had major van repairs where I was looking at, I'm like, oh dear, that's like a lot of money to do all this work. And I suddenly get an e-transfer from a guy, and the note just says, hey, I'm Stephen. I'm a friend of Stephen, a fellow believer in Christ, and I just feel led to give this to you. And it was the same amount for my van. And it was one of these things where I'm like, I just saw the hand of God move through all these generous people. And they took care of my needs and paid my bills. It was wild. You hear these things that, missionaries go through this. And I was a recipient of it. And again, I saw the hand of God through it all. I was blessed to have people at my church just basically gather together and go full force together to help me out. My friend Trish just sent me a spreadsheet. She was like, here's all the people that are going to be coming throughout the weeks to bring you food. And they bring like kids' lunches as well, all sorts of stuff. And people did baking. It was like wild. And I'd be meeting people that were from the church because we couldn't really gather properly during COVID. And I'm meeting people from the church who saw me on the live stream, saw Abby and I on the live stream. And it was just wild. But it was just one of those things where things like that were really practical because I can't cook. Not very well anyways. And so having that where I'm not even worrying about that, it was just a huge stress reliever. No, also having healthy meals that you need nourishment in your body when you're going through traumatic things. And so they're really amazing. I had another lady, Carol Hebert, reach out, and she had the army of grandmas ready. And it was just a pair of ladies would come during the day to give me a break, give me and my mom a break. Mom moved in right away after Abby passed. And so, again, just be able to, whether I need to go get groceries, whether I need to deal with errands, whether I need to be on the phone with the government, they were just people there to help out. And more people started coming out to help me. Again, just with that kind of coverage. I had a friend, Ruth, who just came several times a week, and she was a friend of Abby's and was able to help me and just talk things through and just sort out that whole experience. We're also blessed because Abby was known in the community since working through Calvary Daycare that somebody, their kids were, in her class and stuff. And so this person decided to fundraise to get a doula organization to actually come do night care. So Mom and I could actually get more than a few hours stretch of sleep every night. And so we had a bit of help a few times a week with that, with the doulas coming in. And one interesting experience that I had after being able to actually sleep in a stretch, it kind of your brain shifts a little bit. And it was actually my first time I actually ever had a flashback. And for those who don't really know what a flashback is, it's your brain basically playing a loop of memories. It's kind of like a nightmare, but you're awake. I was used to a lot of nightmares because of just everything going on, but having this when you're awake is huge. So I ended up talking to my one pastor who was a counselor, and he explained to me that that's experience of PTSD. And so I thought, okay, I thought only people that go to war or first responders or anything like that, deal with PTSD like that. And so he kind of explained the process a bit. And thankfully, the good Lord healed me of that. And I don't struggle with that anymore. But it was just a huge experience to go through that and understanding that, grief always has a degree of trauma associated with it and the experience. But I never thought of anything like PTSD or anything like that. One thing I want to bring up is that there are some normal experiences that we go through as you're in the grief process. There's a thing called brain fog. It's basically like having a major concussion all the time. You just can't remember things. It's hard to focus. It's a very terrible thing to be going through, especially while in the midst of you have to care for yourself, and especially for me caring for the kids. And when I did some research, it was one of those things where I found out it's going to affect people for a couple years. And I thought, that's great, because I say that with all sarcasm, because, my memory was shot, and I'm like, I couldn't even remember my own address. And it was very frustrating just to function. And, but one thing I started to do is I was being proactive about getting help. One thing that I was able to do about a month after Abby passes, I went to Bethel Church in Tillsonburg, and they have a ministry called Grief Share, and it's a support group video series that they go through with teachings and everything, and they have discussion portions, and you can basically share your experience. You can talk it out with people. You meet people that are going through the grief experience, and you're learning through all these different things. And there's a workbook and stuff, and it helps you really break things down and really kind of recenter your mind. And also, it's because it's faith-based, it's teaching about, how God walks with us in our journey and helping us unpack that. And people at the church were really awesome. They don't normally have childcare for Grief Share, but people heard about what I was going through and volunteered to staff the nursery. So I was able to come. My parents came with me, and so they took care of that. Later on, I actually met a guy named Peter Cusick at Braeside Camp. He was a pastor for many years, and he does spiritual direction and counseling now. And he was a major part of just counseling me through things. I'm going to probably do a separate video on kind of that whole experience, because just to kind of give some insight to what that looks like. And so right now I just really want to go through, as we kind of wrap up the video, that some practical things, just if you want to be able to help people, or if you need help, kind of when people ask you, hey, what do you need? How can I help you? giving them some things that, hey, this can actually help me. For somebody who has kids, practical things like childcare is massive. The big thing about it, not only does it just help with some of the practical things surrounding that, but having time to grieve is major. When people are so busy that they can't stop to grieve, it really prolongs stages of the process, because there's different stages to grief. And so if you're not able to kind of deal with things in the proper timing, and you're putting things off or shoving things away because you're having to be busy, it really can hinder a person's healing process. So being able to reach out to somebody, and if that's something simple that you can, whether, they got a kid that needs to be taken to soccer or something, just reaching out and saying, hey, I can help with that. It's huge. The other thing I want to bring up is talking about, the whole food situation, that a simple meal can really help somebody. Again, when you're taking things off of somebody's plate that they have to think about, they are then able to focus on the important things, which is dealing with their grief and helping their families. And so that's a really big practical thing that you can do. Reach out to somebody and go, can I make a few suppers for you, or something like that? Or say, what kind of pizza do you like? It's going to be delivered to your house, all taken care of. Little things like that can be huge to somebody. It just shows love. And it just really, again, can affect them in practical ways. Again, things like finances as well. If you're able to be in a position to help somebody, things like gift cards, grocery cards, all that kind of stuff. Very practical things. When people know that there's, funds to take care of those kind of things. Again, when you're taking little bits of like stress off, you're stripping things back, and it's, again, less things that are in front of them that's going to be a distraction. The other thing too is taking the step and doing counseling. There's been stigma for years about reaching out for help. There's a lot of really strange beliefs out there that they think that, a certain amount of time and you're fine, or there's different things like that are basically misconceptions that are very damaging to a person. I firmly believe in getting counseling. I've had counseling. I've talked to many pastors, and I've just reached out. It's very important to do so. I also recommend something like GriefShare. GriefShare is really good. Again, you're meeting with people who have an understanding of your experience, which is really big, because as you go through life, you'll find out that unless somebody's been through big grief experiences, they don't really understand. They can try their best, but they don't really understand. And so connecting with people that do understand is very important. So as we wrap up, just want to let you know that the next videos will probably be more on my spiritual journey as a Christian and a lot of my struggles, because I had a lot of those. I had a lot of different issues in my faith, and just sorting that all out. And God is patient, God is loving, and God is good. And I was able to see him for who he is, but it was a process. And so as we talk about this journey, it's not a linear journey. It's not from one step to another. It's all over the place. But it is a journey that you can take as you take steps of healing. It's very important, and it will change your life. So as always, with all this series and everything like that, I'm kind of new to YouTube. Please feel free to share this. Do the whole like and subscribe thing to get it out there to more people. I just want this to be a resource that can help others. Thank you, and have a blessed day.